Renewable Energy Co-op Board, along with Andrea Murray and actually quite a few other people here in the audience. And we're very pleased tonight to be sponsoring this panel on smart meters. The end of last year, we did a survey of people who were on our email list, and we found that there were quite a few people who really didn't feel that they knew enough about it. So given that feedback, we decided that it might be a good idea to put together something like this. So here we are, and I'm really pleased at the turnout that we have, and we also have a very distinguished panel. We have Jeff Monder from Green Mountain Power. We have Jim Porter from the Public Service Department. We have George Twigg from Efficiency Vermont, and we have Martine Victor from Stop Smart Meters. Or Stop Meters. Stop Meters. Yeah. So I think that we have the potential here to have a very lively and informative discussion, and we're going to follow a format that Andrea and I worked out. And the first part of it would be opening statements of approximately 5 to 7 minutes by each one of the panelists, and then we'll have a moderated discussion on really these major areas, and that would be economics, health, privacy and cybersecurity, opting out, and then some just general points. At that point, we want to open it up to questions from the audience, and you'll be able to ask the panelists questions. And then we hope to have a 10-minute wrap-up where each one of the panelists will have the opportunity to wrap up in 1 to 2 minutes. So with that in mind, yes, ma'am.
Is it the intention for people with different ideas and perspectives to be spoken to respectfully in here?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
ACORN is trying to provide an open forum on this. We respect everyone's opinion, and what we would really like to have happen is for this discussion to reflect all of the different viewpoints on this topic. We would ask that people not go too far astray. So in other words, we want the discussion to be in the context of smart meters. It might be easy to take a particular aspect of smart meters and go beyond that in a broader sense, but we would like to focus the conversation. And the other thing I should mention is that this is being taped, and we will be playing it on Middlebury Community Television. We'll probably be able to get it around to the other cable access stations in the state, and it'll also be on the Middlebury Community Television website. So with that said, it's very important that we get good audio. So Avery McNiff from Middlebury College we've drafted her to run the camera, and so to get good audio, everyone has to be near a mic. So we have this wireless, so when the time comes for anyone to ask a question from the audience, please wait until we can get this mic to you so that your question can be heard. Because if you've ever seen meetings like this where people don't use mics, what you see is you see a moving mouth, but you don't really hear anything. So very important to use mics.
Turn up the audio on your podium mic as well.
Okay, so this one isn't that loud. Okay. We'll see what I can do. Is that better? I see some nods back there. Okay. Okay. So I guess we can get going, and we can start off with Jeff. And Jeff, you can work right here from your laptop?
I can.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jeff Monder. I'm the Director of Smart Grid and Enterprise Project Management at Green Mountain Power. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Smart Grid and the project that we're working on and how it fits together and why we're doing it. Okay. So before you can really start to get into the mechanics of the Smart Grid, we should really talk about the electrical network itself, the grid, and what it's made up of. And really, some folks have said, and I've heard this often said, that the electrical network is the largest and most complicated system ever devised by man. It covers a huge territory. It delivers a complicated service. And one of the most interesting things about it is that it's a service that's delivered in as real time as it's possible. Okay, so we're delivering a product at the speed of light. Okay? Now, how fast do we measure this product that we're delivering at the speed of light? The answer is roughly every 30 days, okay? Because we go around, we read the meter, put it all together, and we understand how the system is operating. Okay? But while we use this methodology, and this is the methodology that's been in place for 100 years, right? While we use this methodology, the demands on the grid are becoming more and more, the greater demands, okay? So we have more sensitive electronics. We have customers that are generating their own power and feeding it back into the grid. We have electric vehicles that are starting to appear and seeming to become quite popular. So all of these things represent challenges. We have environmental concerns, so we want to make sure that the mix of power that we're using is respectful for the environment. So along comes the smart grid, and the idea is to get out of that paradigm that we've been in for 100 years of measuring power every 30 days and measure it in as close to real time as we can. So the smart grid really isn't a specific episode or a project. It's an evolution. It's something that's happening and is going to be happening for quite some time. Okay. It's not just infrastructure. It's going to include programs. It's going to include rates. It's going to include customer engagement. It's going to include an ongoing dialogue between utilities, regulators, utility customers. Everybody's going to participate as people that generate power to come to an answer, an ongoing answer to what is the best way to provide power to consumers. Each of these improvements, okay, and these improvements will include appliances and applications, iPhones, call-outs to customers, green button. Some of you may have heard of green button. And each of these improvements are going to make incremental progress in improving the reliability, the economics, and the environmental sensitivity, the environmental impact of the grid. A big part of adding that management capability is including the customer in the process. Okay. So all of this smart grid starts with communications. It starts with two-way communications, the ability to talk to all of the important devices on the network. Okay, and these devices include substations. They include things on the distribution line that can, for example, redirect power when there's a break in the line. It includes the transmission network so that we can add resiliency, and it includes the meter. So this is a meter, and we actually have an example of a meter. It's right over here. It's plugged in and operating. Right next to it is an in-home display, which is a device that lets you see in real time your power usage. Okay. So the meter, it's the same size and location as the existing meter. It provides two-way communication with the utility. In other words, we can communicate with that meter in real time. Okay. It provides the ability to automatically read meters, so we don't have to visit your home to read the meter. Power interruptions ultimately will be able to be detected when they happen, and power restoration will be able to be detected, so we won't have to get a call from you when this thing is fully constructed, and we won't have to call you to verify that your power is back on. Customers will be able to access information about their usage so that they can understand what rates make the most sense for them, how they're using power. How can I explain why did I have a spike in usage? Why was my bill large for a particular month? Okay, this will help with all of those things. So smart grid benefits. Your bill, and all of our electric bills, reflect a combination of generation, transmission, and energy. Okay, and this combination of factors represent hundreds of millions of dollars that Vermonters are paying for a service each year. So we buy electricity, okay? We're buying generation, we're buying transmission capacity. And all of that stuff is necessary to deliver power to you. Now, something a lot of folks don't realize is that the greatest amount of power that we will use in any given year is the amount of capacity, it's the amount of generation that we actually have to have available. Because, again, we're delivering this resource in real time. So if we don't have enough of that capacity to meet that peak demand, then the network will not perform properly. It can actually fail in those cases. So what the hugest benefit of all of this is the ability to take a look at that broad usage of power and be able to make small incremental adjustments to the amount of generation and transmission that we have to build, the amount of energy that we have to buy, okay? And by doing this, where you've got hundreds of millions of dollars that are being spent on this, very small percentages can represent very large savings for the state as a whole, okay? Beyond this kind of broad societal thing, there are some really good benefits. We've talked a little bit about outage management. The ability to understand when the power is on, where the power is on, when it's off, where it's off, and where we can direct our resources to bring that stuff back on represents a benefit to the customer. It represents a safer approach to managing the network, and it ultimately saves money that gets passed on to the consumer. The ability to support emerging technologies represents another benefit to the smart grid. So electric vehicles, again, smart appliances, which are things that create benefits for all of us as well as for you individually, will be supported and made more practical, more useful through the smart grid. So where are we right now with our smart grid experience? We're in the middle of rolling out meters, but we've already started to see some of the benefits of the smart grid in our outage process. Because what we can do now is we can use the ability to communicate with the smart meters that are out there to detect when we've restored power, when power goes out. Now, we can't yet gather that information about the outages happening, but we can definitely now go out, ping meters, and understand when the power has been restored properly to any given area. And by doing this, it's made our power restoration more efficient. Okay, and this is still very early because we're in the middle of rolling this stuff out. So our current status, we've got 200,000 meters roughly installed across Green Mountain Power service territory. We're on track for completion of meter rollout in April. www.greenmountainpower.com makes hourly data available for most customers with smart meters. And peak time rebates and critical peak pricing pilots, and these are two approaches to setting up ways to deal with those few times during the summer when there are peak demand issues. In other words, the price of power is really high because it's a really hot day and everybody wants to use power at the same time. Okay, so if we can make incentives to have people use a little bit less power, okay, then we can reap large benefits from very small periods of time. Okay, so we have two pilots that are in the works right now for that. So there are questions that come up. A lot of folks have asked about cybersecurity. Okay, cybersecurity is something that is a challenge for every industry. Okay, banking, credit cards, healthcare, online purchases. It's not an unusual issue for any business to tackle, and utilities have been managing security with customer information for a very long time. So we have a lot of background in this. The data in the field is not new to utilities. We've been managing cybersecurity for years out in the field. We have telemetry out in the field. Running out of time? Okay. We have telemetry out in the field, and we can monitor those devices now. So adding additional devices to the field doesn't represent a new paradigm for us. And Vermont utilities are using the best possible safeguards. We're working closely with industry and government to monitor and respond to threats. We're bringing in outside expertise where we need to supplement our own expertise to make sure that we are managing the security of customer information and the energy system as responsibly as it is possible to. In terms of privacy, we have a privacy policy that is comprehensive. It's on our website, and you can look at it anytime you like. GMP has never and will never provide data to a third party without customer authorization or court order. Okay. RF, okay. This issue's come up, and we're going to talk about that a good bit tonight. A couple of things, meters emit signals for less than 10 seconds a day, okay? And RF energy is all about relative power. Okay, if you look at the devices that are listed on this chart, it starts with the smart meter all the way down in the left corner at 1, basically, and it goes all the way up to the RF exposure that is generated by a cell phone, okay, which is 1,000 to 10,000 times greater than a smart meter. Okay.
I think we'll have an opportunity to get into some of these things in the Q&A.
Yep. Just to finish up, we're going to finish our implementation. We're educating customers. Customers are learning to use the tools. We're piloting those rates I was talking about, and we're documenting the benefits. And there are plenty of success stories, including VEC here in Vermont, among utilities around the country. So smart grid is proven. Smart meters are proven to be beneficial already. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What's VAC?
Vermont Electric Cooperative, they're a utility that's had smart grid in place for a while. Okay.
Thank you, Jeff. Our next panelist is Martine Victor from Manchester. Martine is a founding member of Stops Meters, and she has been involved in bringing the attention of the Vermont legislature. She's testified in front of the Vermont legislature and has brought in expert testimony. She has intervenor status in a public service board docket 7307, and she has also worked to put articles on town meeting agendas in 4 towns in southern Vermont. So I'd like to introduce Martine Victor, who will give us another perspective on smart meters.
Thank you. Good evening. Do you want me to stay here, or?
Up to you. If you'd like to stay there, that's fine.
Sounds better here? Oh, okay, sure. Okay, that's better. All right, well, yeah, I've been involved with working with trying to get information out on this whole smart meter deployment and project, because it's good that people understand the other side of, what is being pitched by utility companies. So let me just start in. And I'm happy to be here tonight. It's a nice opportunity to be here with you all. As Americans, we take for granted certain rights we assume are guaranteed by virtue of living in a free, democratic society. The GMP chose to use wireless smart meters undermines our right to live in a safe environment and our right to privacy within our own homes. The benefits from the smart meter system are very real for the utility companies, but remain unproven for ratepayers. In a Consumer's Digest report from January 2011, quote, "Many experts doubt that you'll ever see the electricity and cost savings that electric companies and smart meter manufacturers tout." We interviewed 35 experts, including smart grid and utility industry executives, government regulators, and consumer advocates. We also reviewed thousands of pages of government documents, filings with state utility commissions, materials from smart meter makers, and reports that were produced by the emerging smart grid industry. A few experts suggest that smart meter conversion represents little more than a boondoggle that is being foisted on consumers by the politically influential companies that make the hardware and software that are required for the smart meter conversion. From a consumer's perspective, the potential negative consequences outweigh the benefits. Are Vermonters, end of quote, are Vermonters expected to sacrifice our health, privacy, and suffer potential economic consequences so that a utility company can improve its bottom line? And this fraud was approved by the Public Service Department. Get into the health a little bit. We need to consider the cumulative effects of RF radiation given today's world of ubiquitous wireless devices, and think carefully before allowing new, unproven wireless technology to increase our exposure. Wireless smart meters greatly increase our involuntary exposure because they transmit continuously in a mesh network configuration. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is part of the World Health Organization, has classified RF radiation as a possible Group 2B carcinogen, along with formaldehyde, lead, DDT, and exhaust fumes. The Karolinska Institute in Sweden, which awards the Nobel Prize in Medicine, has called for an immediate halt to further wireless smart meter deployment. Martin Blank, PhD, Columbia University, has shown that RF radiation at very low exposures causes stress and damage to cells and DNA. Quote, cells in the body react to EMFs as potentially harmful, just like to other environmental toxins, including heavy metals and toxic chemicals. The DNA in living cells recognizes electromagnetic fields at very low levels of exposure and produces a biochemical stress response. The scientific evidence tells us that our safety standards are inadequate and that we must protect ourselves from exposure to EMF due to power lines, cell phones, and the like, or risk the known consequences. The science is very strong, and we need to sit up and pay attention. Industry and government agencies that support industry tell us the wireless smart meters are within the Federal Communications FCC guidelines. The FCC standard protects against thermal effects or tissue heating, but scientific research shows that RF radiation in the non-ionizing range, as emitted by smart meters, causes biological harm. The FCC guidelines are obsolete, permitting thousands of times greater exposure than allowed in Russia, Switzerland, Poland, and China, for example. Some of the health effects caused by wireless smart meters include headaches, sleep disruptions, and heart arrhythmias, to name a few. All people are adversely affected, especially children, the elderly, those with implanted medical devices, and those who are electromagnetically hypersensitive. The Elster meters with the Zigbee components used by GMP are transmitting far more frequently than was previously thought, between 5 and 30 pulses per minute, or roughly 8,000 times a day on average. The amount of radiation emitted is far greater than what GMP initially told us. GMP officials thought the Zigbee transmitters were switched off, but in fact, they remain on and cannot be switched off. It is extremely concerning to find out that the utility company responsible for installing this experimental technology doesn't understand how the meters they've purchased and are installing in our homes actually work. As far as opting out, thanks to a bill introduced by Senator Bob Hartwell, Vermonters can opt out of having a smart meter at any time for any reason with no fee attached. Even if you already have a wireless smart meter by law, you can call your utility's customer service and request its removal and the return of your old analog meter. And I urge everyone to opt out. But here's the dilemma. Most of our neighborhoods and public spaces now contain wireless meters. So there is a constant involuntary exposure, whether you have personally opted out or not. With this technology, you no longer have privacy within your own home. Smart meters generate huge amounts of granular data, providing a detailed picture of your electricity use. Everything you do within your own home can be gleaned. When you watch TV, cook, use a treadmill, if you are home or not, creating opportunities for home invasion. Anything wireless can be hacked. This data is valuable to utilities and opens up a new revenue stream of potential earnings, separate from the sale of electricity. We don't know the full extent of how this data can be used, but here are some of the likely ways. Data miners researching product saturation, advertisers, insurance companies. Experts also believe a centralized wireless smart meter system leaves the grid vulnerable to sabotage and also vulnerable to huge solar flares. In a Washington Post article, power grid updates left system vulnerable to cyber attacks, auditors say, quote, a rush by the Energy Department to use stimulus money to modernize the country's power grid has left the system vulnerable to cyber attacks, the agency's internal watchdog found. Inspector General Gregory H. Friedman found shortcomings in the cybersecurity plans of more than a third of the utility companies that got federal funding for smart grid projects, from incomplete strategies to prevent an attack to vague steps for stopping one if it started. And Alan Gilbert, the ACLU Vermont, is concerned with warrantless searches of the public's utility use. And our former CIA chief Director David Petraeus, there was an article written in Wired magazine, will spy on you through your dishwasher. Smart meters are surveillance systems, former CIA Director David Petraeus, in an article in Wired magazine entitled, Will Spy on You Through Your Dishwasher, mused about the emergence of an Internet of Things, saying transformational is an overused word, but I do believe it properly applies to these technologies, particularly to their effect on clandestine tradecraft. The meters themselves save no electricity. In fact, they use electricity to function. They are not UL certified. It's not a green technology, as vast energy-consuming data banks are needed to store all the data generated. GMP CVPS received $69 million in subsidies from the Department of Energy, and utilities have a guaranteed 10% rate of return on their investment. The more they spend, the more they make. Utilities realize tens of millions in savings by eliminating meter readers and their equipment, even if there are no other savings. Smart meters allow them to remotely disconnect a customer's power, may usher in the practice of prepaid electricity cards, which has been done in South Africa. After a 10,000 customer pilot study, Connecticut's Attorney General determined there were no customer savings. He also found the time of use pricing to be discriminatory for people unable to shift their electricity use, elderly, childcare providers, home businesses. GMP plans to introduce the time of use pricing, which is based on behavior modification. Utilities hope to shave energy use by forcing people to shift their behavior patterns by punitive pricing. And ratepayers across the country have noticed rate increases and billing errors. Finally, are Vermonters expected to shell out thousands of dollars to purchase home area networks and new smart appliances to communicate with their smart meter? Many health experts think wireless smart meters may constitute the health crisis of our time and advise people to reduce exposure to RF radiation, not increase it. A precautionary approach is merited. Given the dubious benefits and outright harm, these meters should be immediately removed statewide. In the meantime, we do have the right to opt out. Call your utility and request the return of your analog meter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martine. Our next panelist is George Twigg from Efficiency Vermont. And
See if I can figure out Jeff's computer here without breaking it.
It's right here. See that?
Yeah. All right, great. Thanks, everybody. I'm George Twigg. I'm with Efficiency Vermont. Thanks for having this event tonight. So Efficiency Vermont is a statewide energy efficiency utility, just as folks like Green Mountain Power provide electricity supply. Efficiency Vermont is regulated by the Public Service Board and is charged with helping people reduce their use of energy or use it more efficiently. Hello. We're sort of technology neutral, I guess, in that our approach is we want to look at whether it's more efficient lighting, smart grid, any device, any kind of technology that might be out there, what can be effective in helping people to save money, save energy, and really from, Jeff kind of talked about largely from the utility side of the meter, kind of what the infrastructure aspect of smart grid is. And what we sort of look at is more the customer side of the meter in terms of how can you use this information to help you save money and reduce your energy costs. This is somebody else's presentation that is much more elaborate than mine in terms of how it builds. But we're very much at the kind of beginning stages of smart grid. And in some ways it's similar to the way the internet developed over time. which when you look at some of this history going back many decades, you know, what the internet started for what it was designed for. You know, at that time, nobody really had any idea what it could ultimately be used for in terms of what its capabilities could leverage. So, you know, really in the late 60s, it was really intended as a very academic, decentralized way to share information among universities. There is no thought of smartphones or Google or Facebook or any of the things that we take it for granted now. And, you know, I think in a lot of ways, smart grid is in that very similar place now where a lot of the infrastructure is in place, a lot of the poles and wires, and we're just beginning to really get a sense of what we can do with this information. Because, you know, I think from Efficiency Vermont's standpoint, it's really about what you can do with this data. How can you, you know, not the utilities, not a third party, but how can you actually make use of this information to help you meet your own energy savings goals? And, you know, Jeff talked a little bit about this idea of, for instance, peak demand, the idea that energy is extremely expensive during certain times of the year, certain times of the day. You know, the way the utility grid is built out, it's to make sure that at the hottest minute of the hottest hour of the hottest day of the hottest month of the year, there's enough electricity to run all the air conditioners, all of the lights, all of the other devices that might be needed. And that's tremendously expensive for everybody, you know, because all those costs for all of that generation, all of that transmission is built into the rates that we all pay. And if through smart grid you can get a better sense of what is driving your electricity use in your home, are there ways that you can reduce that? Even just a little bit, it makes a huge difference. Even a 1%, a 2% decrease in how much electricity the state is using on that hottest day of the year, you know, that's a big deal. And that could be the difference down the line of, you know, not having to build another power plant somewhere or not having to bring in another power line. There's a lot of benefit there. And so there's this, you know, so there's the peak side, and then there's also the, you know, what we work on a lot, especially is the energy efficiency side. So if you can understand, you know, through smart grid a little bit more about, you know, how much energy are your lights using, how much energy are different devices in your home using, it helps you identify and better diagnose, you know, what you can do to reduce your costs. You know, as Jeff said, you know, if you are getting an electricity bill once a month, it's pretty hard to figure out within a monthly bill what's actually driving that, what's actually making those costs go up and down, what are those costs even comprised of. I've heard it kind of described as the idea of you go grocery shopping, but there's no price on anything. You just get to the checkout line at the end and you pay, you know, $100, but you don't know what any of the individual items cost. You just pay the full freight. With more information, with more knowledge, the hope is that you can get a better sense of what you're actually paying for, what it's costing you to have, you know, this refrigerator, to leave the lights on, or to run a pool pump. And, you know, just as a kind of a graphic example, you know, I talked about, say, monthly usage. So this is an example of what your usage might look like hour-to-hour basis. And so you can kind of see, you know, maybe around 6 or 7, you get up in the morning, there's a little spike because you're taking a shower, you're running your water heater, but then you go to work, but then towards the end of the day, you get home, you start to turn on your lights, you're making dinner, you're doing the dishes, you're watching some TV, and then your power is kind of dropping off. So you can start to understand as a user, and there are, you know, through the utilities, there will be, you know, web portals where you can actually look at your information. If you're a Vermont Electric customer like I am, you can already go online and look at this kind of information. You can start to understand a little bit better about, like, you know, well, how is my energy being used? And then, you know, take the next step of, you know, what can I do about it? And the more detailed it gets, the better you can understand what actually makes up that usage. So this is taking that same information to the next level, which would be by 15 minutes, and so you can start to see a little bit more up and down. And 15-minute intervals, as I think about where Green Mountain is with what their website will be able to show customers. Is that right, Jeff?
Yeah, we're 1 hour now, but
Hour,
ultimately.
yeah. And eventually you could get to a minute, and you get, even more granular. But I think the point is, if you believe in the idea that information is power, then understanding more about what your usage is, what those patterns are, that can be helpful in taking action to reduce that usage. So you can start to see, well, if my power is up, this much in the evening, well, look at my kitchen lights. I have a bunch of incandescent kitchen lights that are on, so maybe that's something where I should look at replacing those with CFLs. It just gives you more information to be able to make those choices, understand that. There has been a good amount of experience on the energy efficiency side with smart meters in other parts of the country. Although Vermont's is fairly recent, there have been these deployments going on and experiments going on over the course of time. This is a study from ACEEE. It's the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. It's not a utility organization. It's a nonprofit, and so they did a review last year looking at some of the different studies around the country that have showed what the energy efficiency potential is. How much can people really save if they're able to take advantage of this information? And kind of what you see here is a range of what that review found, and anywhere from 4 to 12%, but with generally the trend that the more detailed information people have access to, the better they're able to take action in order to reduce their energy use. And if you could get obviously if you get to where even 6-8% off of your electric bill every month, that's a substantial savings for a lot of people. This was kind of going back to my earlier comment just about the grid, and it's a huge social cost that we're all bearing by having to build out more capacity than we need. And if we can, and it's like flying around an airplane with no, maybe on Thanksgiving Eve, right? That plane will be full. Otherwise, maybe there's fewer passengers, maybe just a couple folks in it, and so it's a socialized cost. We all bear it every time a new transmission line has to get built, and if we can again reduce the need for that peak demand, everybody saves money individually, but then it's also a social cost that all of us can save on. These are just a couple examples of the types of portals that are starting to come out onto the market. The utilities are providing some, but I think the kind of neat thing is as we start to go forward, you're going to see more and more just independent companies out there who are able to help you kind of make use of your smart grid information in ways that you can actually take action on. For some people, they just it's not enough savings for them to care about. Other people are really interested in it. Some people are motivated by financial issues. Others might be motivated by climate change. One of the neat kind of developments recently has been this idea about what's called Green Button, which is basically an open source data standard so that you can share your energy usage data at your choice with your control with a number of private and nonprofit companies who are out there who are creating apps and all kinds of different programs that can help interpret this data in ways that are actually useful to your level of interest, your motivation, just however it is that you want to actually make use of this data. And so there are apps that are focused on if the less energy you use, there'll be an illustration of a polar bear, and his depending on if you're using a lot of energy, his ice flow will get larger or smaller. There are ones that have kind of piggy bank interfaces, and so you can really see kind of the financial motivation. There are ones that are more attuned to kids, more attuned to adults. But again, if you think about that example of the internet, the idea is there's an open standard, and this is your data, and you can make use of it in the ways that you want to, and it gives you a lot of control over that. For Efficiency Vermont, Smart Grid is just kind of, again, part of a continuum. We're always looking for new technologies that can help people save money. We're always testing different options. And one of the things I'll just highlight here is this thing that says enhanced customer service. one of the things that we're looking at is, for a lot of people, they're not going to sit in front of a spreadsheet or, play with these apps a lot. So is there a way that we can make it easy? So if you just call our 800 number to ask us, like, what am I seeing here? Like, what can I do with this? That we actually have people who can just very simply provide a few tips that are, easy to use and that will help you get some quick savings. Because, again, not everybody's going to want to log onto their smartphone or their computer and kind of engage in it that way. So, again, are there ways where it's even just direct human interaction and contact where, that's the most effective way to help people save money and take advantage of this? So there are a few studies going on right now.
Excuse me, could you
Yep,
wrap up, please?
sure thing. I think it's my last slide. So I won't dwell on these, but I will just say there is a new one that we're working on right now. They're actually looking for volunteers for, so if there are any folks here who are interested, let me know afterwards and I can get you in touch with somebody who can sign you up. But again, kind of the goal here is how can consumers take advantage of what's being put in place by the utilities and save as much money as possible. And that's it. So my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, George. I hate to be hard on people for
Nope.
time, but we're trying to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions. So our next panelist is Jim Porter from the Public Service Department. And George, I won't dock you if you take a little time to explain the difference between the Public Service Department and the Public Service Board, because there's a lot of confusion about who is who. So that would be very helpful.
Great.
Thanks.
In case you detect an accent, I'm going to begin by telling you I usually tell people I'm from Southern Vermont. Since Martine actually is from Southern Vermont, I'm going to have to come clean and say it's an Alabama accent that you're hearing. But to go to the difference between the Public Service Board and the Public Service Department, the Public Service Board acts as a quasi-judicial body. They're the judges. They make the decisions in regulatory matters. And then the Public Service Department, we're the advocates. We're always a party to those proceedings, and we will argue one way or another in a case. But the Public Service Board, which is not me, that would be the decision maker. We're the advocates. I would just give you a brief overview. If you go back to 2009, I think 5 or 6 of the Vermont utilities got together and applied for Department of Energy grant. They received it. It was $69 million. A condition of the grant was that utilities would have to come up with another $69 million. And the participants in that grant are Green Mountain Power, at the time Central Vermont Public Service Corporation, Washington Electric Cooperative, Stowe Electric Department, and Burlington Electric. And then Vermont Electric Cooperative had already converted their system to smart meters. So we think that by April of this year, Vermont will be really border to border about 85 to 90% deployed with smart meters, which is very unique. We're the only state in the country that will have that type of deployment. So as a regulator, it's very exciting, and for me, that we're going to have that type penetration rate. And as I know George and Jeff have alluded to, once you do, if you can have consumer behavior that, has a 1 to 2 or 3% effect, when it's the entire state, you actually do have the ability to make a huge difference in our energy usage. One thing I would talk about very briefly, because I know we're going to talk about benefits and pricing, but you've heard a little bit about dynamic pricing and time of use rates. And really, certainly the larger utilities, GMP and CVPS, have had various time of use rates since the late 70s, early 80s. The problem from my perspective was, if a customer wanted to take advantage of that rate, they had to purchase an additional, I think, fairly expensive meter, and then there was one rate that people would volunteer for, that they would get a signal when the price was high. And a lot of people in CVPS territory literally had a red light in their kitchen that came on and said price, energy's high. But with the smart meters being installed, every Vermonter that wants to can immediately avail themselves of these time of use rates. So we think it makes the ability to save money perhaps more immediately available for those who actually need it the most. And we also anticipate this year, as the meters have become deployed, we will move into the phase where the Public Service Board will start to determine what are the best type of rates that can be put in place that people can use to take advantage of the savings that can be there. One thing I would ask you, and we do have an in-home device here, I think all of the utilities now or very shortly will have web presentment where you can go on the internet and see what your usage was the day before or on an hourly basis. And I believe also by the end of this year, anyone can get an in-home device if they would like to, which actually shows you what the price is at that time and how much energy you're using and what it's costing you. So we think that's exciting. And then as George talked about, the Green Button Initiative really puts everyone in the country's energy usage in a very uniform and finite manner in which there are all kinds of apps. And as George said, EVT is working now on some that are very Vermont specific that we think will be very helpful as well. So we look forward to it's interesting. We've spent a couple of years with the utilities and deployment, and now we're moving into working with Efficiency Vermont from the consumer-facing benefits. So exciting time.
Thank you all. My name is Andrea Murray, and I'm going to begin some of the question and answer session. We have a few questions already composed that we would like to ask our panelists. I'd like to begin with a topic of health. Martine, you present some very compelling studies and evidence about the dangers, potential dangers for smart meters, and some of it seems to be slightly at odds with information presented by other panelists. And I'm wondering if perhaps we could have a little bit of conversation about that. Are there different sources? Do we not yet have, one complete body of information? Because I don't think anybody knowingly or willingly wants to put in a smart meter that is going to affect the health of themselves, their loved ones, et cetera. So I'm going to try and ask you to limit your comments maybe to a minute or so each.
Well, I think there's so much information now about RF radiation, and as we know, cell phones, baby monitors, all of these things, Wi-Fi are sources, but most of those are things you choose to use, like your cell phone. That's exposure that you choose. But the smart meter is something that it's a pulsed type of signal. There are thousands of transmissions. It may be that only your data is sent several times a day, but the meters constantly pulse, between themselves in what is known as the mesh network. So there's just a lot of excess, radiation being put into the environment. And the difference is a cell phone, it's a stronger exposure. It's up next to next to your ear, next to your brain, next to your skull, whereas the smart meter is whole body exposure. So it's actually a greater amount of exposure. And these signals have to travel, several miles often to reach the next meter, because that's how the information is passed along. So what has been demonstrated, where there's been, earlier deployment of meters, California, in many places people have had very bad health effects, problems associated with the meters, and it often took them a while to determine that it was the meter. Because, the meter had been deployed, and then they, some people, it's something that will impact everyone, but certain people are more susceptible. And in this day and age, it is a growing health problem. And people, just the exposure that is sort of ubiquitous. And people need to curb, what's around. And this is just a sort of egregious, amount that's being dumped into our environment. It's pollution, basically. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen, would any of you like to comment?
I'd be happy to. As Martine said, these smart meters generally transmit on the same frequencies as Wi-Fi, which is in this room, as baby monitors, cordless phones.
The frequency.
Generally 900 megahertz, and then there's one radio that transmit at 2.4 gigahertz.
So you're using both?
Correct. And you have a choice to use all of those devices, just like you have a choice to have a smart meter. The utilities and the Department of Public Service were adamant when we first began talking about the deployment of smart meters that any Vermonter would have the ability to opt out. This past year, the legislature went further and said you can opt out and have no fee attached to that. We're the only state in the country that has that option. And so, these devices are a choice as well. I tend to think they are much smaller emitters than some of the other things that we talk about. And the one thing I can tell you, the Department of Public Service has just commissioned one study where we've hired a firm to come do field measurements and lab testing of the meters that we actually have deployed in Vermont. That report should be publicly available in the next week or two. And then we are also in the process of doing an RFP for another health review. But one of the interesting things that I've seen in the draft report that's coming is in Vermont, you typically, anywhere you are, get more exposure from FM radio signals than you do from standing 1 foot in front of a smart meter. And there's literally nowhere you can escape some of this stuff. So I think on the magnitude of things, these meters are very low down on the list, particularly when compared with cell phones.
I'll just add a couple of things. I think Jim covered a lot of ground there. I'll say this, Green Mountain Power has a culture of safety, all right? We prioritize on the protection of our customers and our employees, and electricity, quite frankly, is a dangerous thing. So it's sensible that we're really focused on safety, okay? So in that environment, we considered our options on how to implement smart grid technology. We would not have put this into production. We would not be rolling it out as configured if we did not believe with absolute conviction that this stuff is 100% safe, okay? Let's talk about relativity for a second, all right? The smart meter, it's true. It talks on 900 megahertz and it talks on 2.4 gigahertz. Those are the radios that are in each smart meter, okay? They have to talk in order to convey that information back to the utility to be able to present the information to customers, in order to be able to render bills, and so forth. So in the process of doing all of that communication, the meter itself communicates, and this is a really important piece of information. Over the course of a single day, each meter communicates for about 10 seconds total. About 10 seconds total, okay? Now, I'll just put one other piece of information out there. It's true that the meters communicate several times a minute. They send out a little bit of information several times a minute, looking for a Zigbee device to talk to, and then periodically sending that metering information on a cycle of every few hours. All right. How many cell phones are in this room? How many people have cell phones right now? Just a show of hands. Come on. I know you got them. So there's probably 20, 30 cell phones in this room right now. All right. Each cell phone, I want this to sink in for you. Each cell phone communicates every 400 milliseconds with the base station. In other words, the radio station that's somewhere nearby here, somewhere in Middlebury. Okay. So, and in the process of doing that communication, each communication is done at a much higher power than these cell phones are capable of generating. So all of this stuff needs to be put in perspective. We need to think of it in terms of relative impact on us. As a society, we've made this decision to embrace radio technology, to do things from communicating with each other, to cooking food, to receiving a television signal, okay? And that is, and that's something that's surrounding us. But, if ultimately the answer to this is if you really object to this, you can opt out. And because the signal from a meter, the exposure to the signal from a meter diminishes tremendously as you move away from it. It's called, I'm not going to get into this, but there's an inverted square of reduction in signal. So if you move from 1 foot from a meter to 2 feet from a meter, the power that you're being exposed to is a quarter of what it was at 1 foot. Okay? So if you kind of wrap your head around that, one other piece of information. The signal from a television antenna, a television broadcast antenna, it broadcasts at 1,000,000 watts. Okay? By the time it gets to you, even down at the bottom of the hill from where that antenna is, it's at about 0.003 watts. So your exposure, that basic law of physics is diminishing the exposure by a tremendous amount.
George, did you want to say anything?
Well, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an engineer. I just think the other aspect, I guess, as a kind of a environmentally focused organization we look at sometimes is, if you're looking at environmental health, there is this question about the emissions from smart meters, and I think it's good that the state health department and others are, kind of doing the literature review to, call the different sources, that whether it's one that Martine cites or that the utilities cite, to kind of give what I, think is a kind of a more of an independent view for those of us who aren't actual scientists or doctors. And that's going to, and I think that's a useful thing for the state to do to help better inform people. I think the other aspect to keep in mind is from the standpoint of environmental health, again, going back to this idea that, while there might be some discussions about what smart meters do or don't do in terms of emissions, we know for a fact what fossil fuel electricity generators do in terms of emissions. Whether it's a coal plant, to a lesser extent natural gas, they emit mercury, they emit carbon dioxide. We know the environmental health impacts of those, and they're, in my view, kind of cataclysmic from a global environmental health standpoint. So I think that, it's good to have a discussion about making sure that we really understand and have nailed whatever some of these potential health impacts might be of the meters. Keep in mind that one of the things these meters are enabling is reductions in electricity generation, and there are massive health benefits to that, global climate benefits as well as individual health from mercury and other emissions.
I'd like to follow this up with a question about opting out. And should a consumer wish to opt out, you've made it very clear that there is no charge to do that at any particular time. Besides the information that a consumer has access to that could potentially change their behavior or help them know better how to use less power, what kinds, or do you envision any penalties down the road, rate penalties or anything like that could occur for those people who have not a smart meter?
I'll answer that on behalf, as a regulator, no penalties. And when we talk about these rate plans that will come about, from our perspective, they're all going to have to be voluntary. I don't think we would, under any circumstance, ever support that they not be voluntary. I think Martine alluded to prepaid electricity, which is going on in parts of this country as well as remote disconnects. The one thing I would say is I'm not sure there's any entity in the country as tightly regulated by the state as the electric utilities in Vermont, and I just don't see that happening here.
So a consumer has access to the same options, if you will, in terms of choosing their rates, or will have those same options whether or not they have a smart meter?
No. Now, the consumers will not be able to have the time of use rates with the old meters going forward. No.
Okay.
So we've tried to preserve as much of the structure as possible for folks that have opted out. There will be new programs that kind of leverage the information that the smart meters can generate, and if you don't have that information, you can't take advantage of it. And I think that's really where the sacrifice would be in opting
In terms of the economics and the economic benefits of smart meters, it's clear that you made it clear that everyone should see some benefits over the next several years, both the utilities as well as the users. Can you tell us a little bit about the projections and the trending that you hope to see in 10 years, 20 years, both in terms of economics and also in terms of energy?
I can answer the economics part about the systems, and then I'll let George talk about the other perhaps. Every utility that deployed smart meters had to present a business plan to the Public Service Board. And that plan basically said what the savings to the utility would be over a 20-year period. For example, for CVPS at the time before it was merged, over 20 years, they show a savings of $185 million. To our smallest utility, Washington Electric, they show a savings of about $6 million. And so the Public Service Board approved those business plans, and there are measurement and verification reporting that the utilities have to provide, I believe, quarterly, to make sure that they're meeting the benchmarks to ensure that those savings do attain.
Well, I'll just say on the consumer side, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the figures you just said, Jim, are the utility savings alone, right?
Right,
So
that's the initial.
operational
right,
savings.
Operational savings.
So, for instance, one of my slides had a bar graph showing savings of 4 to 12% for consumers through efficiency due to being able to have a better sense of understanding where your energy use is and being able to take action based on that. That's consumer savings that would be additional to whatever the utility savings are. And so, ultimately, now, all that savings ultimately accrues to consumers because what utilities save, there's a rate benefit to that. And then individual consumers using less electricity, there's the direct just benefit of having your own direct costs reduced. So I think there'll be, again, we've got some of these pilots that are going on now to better understand what is actually most effective and most useful for consumers. And I feel like we're really kind of very much at the beginning of understanding what the best ways to use this technology are going to be.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in order to, have this conservation, part of the program, as I understand it, is that consumers would need to be purchasing smart appliances that can be programmed from afar. And in other words, if you want, or programmed at home or whatever, but in other words, they have to have the smart chips in them, which actually creates another level of radiation within the house. And also, there's the phenomenon of vampire energy, where you have all these new appliances, and they always have to be in the on position, waiting for the signal to either, shut them down, turn them on, turn them up, what have you. And that's using electricity in and of itself. And then there's this whole idea of smart thermostats. And, there's a lot of insecurity with a wireless system, where things can be programmed. What if someone inadvertently turns your heat off, in a 10 below zero day? What if, who is responsible for this type of thing? There's been, litigation involved with a number of these topics that, hit on this subject. And the other thing, you keep mentioning Washington Electric Co-op and Vermont Electric Co-op, and I just want to make it clear that those two co-ops are using hardwired meters. And I think that there would have been a lot less backlash had that been your choice, which apparently was something you were negotiating for initially, I believe, the hardwired meters for CVPS and GMP. And then there was, I guess, when VTEL was given a grant of something like $232 million, and then there was you dropped that negotiation apparently and decided to piggyback on that build-out. So I'm a little perplexed.
Let me first go quickly to the smart appliances. I think the immediate thing we will see is the time of use rates and the ability to avail yourselves of those. The smart appliances that you hear about, I'm sure that they will be here one day. They're not here today.
GE makes them now.
They make some.
Yes.
But to me, and I think there are people, I had a former commissioner who was very excited about that, very high tech. For me, that's not one of the big benefits. You know, for me, appliances, when they die, I'm going to buy a new one and not until then. And so they will be a big part of it, but I see that as a phase a little bit more in the future. The one thing I would say that Martine brought up about wireline versus wired solutions, and I'm speaking very generally because keep in mind, if anyone has enough money, you can almost do anything. But generally speaking, in a place like Vermont, a wired solution is much better for a utility like VEC or WEC that is more rural. The fact of the matter is, if you took the AMI system that WEC has and tried to operate parts of GMP or BED off of that, the system would literally fail because it cannot carry enough data fast enough. Now, there are exceptions to that. If you spend enough money, you can make that happen. But it's interesting, I have a new commissioner who has a physics background as opposed to my immediate past one who is a lawyer. And he came in and he said, well, does anyone talk about the fact that the power line carriers also have emissions as well? And that actually comes with a whole other problem that probably no need to get into. But in Vermont, that's why you have the choice really with the wired and the wireline, which was what would carry enough data for that particular utility that was affordable to make a business case.
Well, ideally, you know, one would use fiber optic, which has been done in Italy and Japan. And I know everybody says, oh, you know, so expensive. But to me, if it can't be done safely, and fiber optic has unlimited, you know, frequency.
The one response I would say to that is Burlington Electric, as some of you know, has also Burlington Telecom, which has fiber to every area of Burlington. And they chose a wireless solution when they had fiber at their disposal.
They're also very closely connected with IBM, with the Itron meters, and there's some partnership going on there. So I do think there's research grants and a lot of money being thrown at this, you know, which, you know, behavioral studies, the grant given to UVM by, I think, the National Science Foundation. What was it? It was something like $5 million for 22 graduate students at UVM to study, like, the mesh of IT systems and human behavior.
Yeah,
So-
there's no skeleton in the closet with this stuff. This is really
Well, I'm
all
just saying
very,
that
very
behavioral.
public, all open and
Yes.
publicly available to look
But I'm saying
at.
what may have influenced choices to use wireless.
Not really, because when we were looking at the decision on whether to go with wireless or wireline meters, it was before IBM or Sandia or any of those other players became involved in the discussion. The decision was purely made based on what the functional capabilities of the system was to do what we needed it to do and what we thought was in the best interest of our ratepayers.
I just have to jump in with one quick little thing. I just wanted to say, you know, early on in this, we heard from Avram Pat, who I believe is the director or president or whatever of, is it Washington Electric? I think. And he had said they went with wired because of that very thing you mentioned, you know, very rural community, you know, sparse population, you know, hilly mountainous terrain that creates obstacles. But I think all of Vermont is that way. I mean, where I live in Manchester, and most of Vermont is very rural and hilly and residential and sparsely populated. So I don't really buy that argument that wireless is a better choice.
I'm going to interject here. And
Okay.
it's an important point, but I want to try and refocus and touch on some of the major points and make sure we have time for Q&A. Just in general, what has the customer response been to date in terms of smart meters? Are there bugs? Have we been working out bugs? What kinds of oddities are we seeing? What should we expect as we start to install them in our homes? What kinds of changes are we going to experience?
I mean, our experience has been that the meter information has been very accurate. I think it's important to realize that the stuff isn't new. It's been around for a while now. There's been a lot of kind of challenges and a lot of tests to demonstrate the accuracy of the meters. In Texas, they did a bunch of testing where they had meters right next to each other, and they ran them through periods to make sure that they were in fact accurate and took separate measurements. So we've seen really, you know, extreme accuracy from the meters. Early on, We had challenges as we were figuring out how to build the communications network to bring all of that information back from every meter reliably. We got through that, and the system is working very well and doing everything it's supposed to do.
Are we going to see hiccups as we sign up for different rates? Oh my gosh, I can't have my dishwasher running at the same time as my whatever, or you know, are we going to see are there any strange things that are happening, or are there big changes that we should expect as a consumer?
If you look at what's going on at utilities around the country, and there are plenty of utilities that have, you know, deployed this stuff ahead of us, it's really pretty much business as usual. The stuff is going out there, it's working. You know, customers are interacting with the data at different rates depending on, you know, what the utility is offering at that particular time. And the stuff is working. We've heard very few horror stories. We've, you know, there's been kind of the anecdotal stuff and the, you know, the concerns that folks have raised about RF and security and privacy, but we haven't seen actual demonstration, for example, of the security compromises that, you know, have been discussed so much.
And one thing, I was involved when, if any of you remember, when Fairpoint purchased the old Verizon properties, and when they cut over to their own systems, it was, I believe, the worst telecommunications cutover disaster in American history. And one thing we learned from that was, with smart meters, we're making very sure, as are the utilities, that the systems are completely deployed, completely in place, up and running before some of the rates sort of get integrated with them. So it actually may be even a little bit slower here because of that experience, but that's one that I don't intend to live through again, being responsible for. So.
Okay.
Will you ask me about any good things? Because it seems to be a bias
Yeah.
towards negative.
Well, I asked some good things and I didn't get an answer. I was curious in terms of
Imagine that.
energy efficiency, and I asked the question, what kinds of overtime energy savings do we expect to see?
All right, oh, I'm sorry, I thought I,
Storm operations too, like, we just had a big weather event here. Did it help with that?
well, I think I hopefully I answered some of the question about energy efficiency where, you know, we have seen, you know, this is relatively new in Vermont, but in other places where smart grid has been put in place, we've seen, depending on the types of systems, people saving, you know, 4, 10, 12%, depending on, you know, the technology and how engaged they are and how much they're interested in this. So it's not trivial, and I think, you know, part of what Efficiency Vermont's goal going forward is to see, you know, how can we customize this and tailor this most to what Vermonters want to see and how they want to make use of this.
So there's no projection of, you know, we're trying to save X percent or X number of kilowatt hours, whatever we're trying to do.
So there are kind of these three classes of savings, and there are projections for all of them. There's savings in kind of utility operations. Those are kind of the readily quantifiable
Right.
ones that can be come up with. And all of those savings are passed on to the ratepayers through rates, okay? They're not, there's nothing behind the scenes there. All of that stuff gets passed on.
Great.
Then there is the consumer enabling technologies and the new rates that are going to give folks options for how to use the information. And I think it was George that was saying that, you know, some folks are going to look at that and go, awesome, I'm going to take advantage of all of it. And then some folks are going to look and say, you know, I'm not that interested in that. And that's all kind of individual discretion there. And then there's the societal benefit, which is, you know, the discussions that we were having about shaving peak and where the opportunities are there, and where the opportunities are for the, you know, that hottest day, the hottest hour, or the hottest minute, being able to actually save money in those wild swings in the cost of power. All of those things represent buckets of benefits. Those buckets of benefits have been quantified. We're reporting to the department on a quarterly basis on how we're doing relative to that stuff. It's really early in the project. We're very optimistic that, you know, the benefits that we've projected are going to be realized.
And to go back, and one of the things I know Jeff alluded to is there are several consumer behavior studies going on right now. See, you have, I think, the largest participants right now, but it's testing different kinds of rates and to see what people are the most responsive to, what they like, what they don't like. So once we get that data, which will be the end of this year, then I think we'll know better. Because one thing we want is when the consumer calls either George's outfit or the utility and says, hey, how do I best take advantage of this? We want to have a little bit of data to say, this is what we've seen. And so, and also to make sure that everything's in place for that. Plus, rates have to be approved by the Public Service Board. And it's a little bit difficult in regulatory rate making. Different rates are a little bit anathema to some extent. And so it will be a big process, but we think within the next 18 months, 24 months, that will be rolling out. And that's really where the customers will get to see the benefits that they can control.
Thank you. In interest of time, yes, I'd like to open it up.
Just a few random remarks. First of all, I'm glad to see that people realise that radio frequencies do cover an entire spectrum.
Excuse me, John.
Oh, sorry, John.
For the taping, unless you use the mic, nobody will hear who listens to the tape. This one is on now. Avery, is it a good time to change the tape?
Yeah, we have 8.
Okay.
Story of my
Let's-
life.
okay. All set? We're recording? Okay. Introduce yourself and.
My name's John Meakin. I live virtually under a transmission line which comes across my meadow. I live within a stone's throw of Weybridge Dam, which generates 3 megawatts. First of all, I was pleased to see that people realise that radio frequency is not the last word. There are frequencies from gigahertz to megahertz to kilohertz. I get my television through the air, and so far I've detected no health benefits or disadvantages of that radiation. If you really want to worry about something, worry about getting home. Your chances of dying prematurely are massively more on the road than anywhere. You mentioned Sweden and the Nobel Prize. Max Planck got the Nobel Prize in 1918 for establishing the truth of quantum theory. Every time you look at your watch, you accept the truth of quantum theory. Quantum theory says that energy is in discrete quanta. There are no cumulative effects. If the quanta isn't big enough to do something, it doesn't matter whether there's 1 or 10 billion. Let me see anybody in this room get a good suntan under an infrared lamp. Why can't you get a suntan under an infrared lamp? The quanta are too weak. Try an ultraviolet lamp, but don't sit under it for too long. They are 6 eV quanta, and they are very powerful. The idea about 100 years ago was that electricity was dangerous. Which was more dangerous, DC or AC? And there was a massive argument about that. We have gone beyond that. Please let us stick to science. I should cease. Thank you.
Question and answer.
Okay, well, I had a few statements I wish to make.
Okay. Well, probably all of you.
The lady in the front here. The blue.
Thank you. I'm Kathy Trudell. I've had 3 brain tumors, and I'm scared to death of what's been talked about here because I've had 3 brain tumors. But it's exciting, so I don't know which way to go. It's a tough one. I have a cell phone, but I never use it. It's only when I travel, and it's a track phone, so it has nothing. And yeah, so I guess I need to follow my heart, but I'm really frightened, but I'm excited at the same time, so I guess I just flip a coin, see which way I go.
Well, I would just like to say, I think it's the cumulative effects, long-term exposure, which with smart meters at this point, we don't know, but we do know from cell phones, and we do know from other sources, from World War II, from radar, where studies have been done. So there's no doubt. I mean, the science is there, that shows, this exposure. And the thing about smart meters is that if you time average it, it appears to be very slight, but each individual pulse is quite high, even though it's just a fraction of a microsecond or whatever. But it is continuous, so it's kind of, just almost like a strobe light, that is impacting you. And so I think that's, that's where the danger lies, in that just, cumulative exposure and day in and day out. And, people that know about this are really trying to minimize, exposures and have Ethernet cables and, not have Wi-Fi in their house, not use DECT phones. These are all, there's more information coming out all the time. And I think, educated consumers are trying to reduce that exposure. This is something new in the history of our world. If you look at the last 20 years, I mean, wireless, technology is here, but, to use it safely is what's important. This has been implicated in autism, Alzheimer's. There have been studies done that show pregnant mothers, sleeping within a certain distance of modems, and then they've backtracked. And later, the child's developed autism, and there have been some pretty conclusive studies, on that score. So, I mean, when you think about it, that could very well be, one of the prime impacts on children developing autism. It's the largest, greatest pollution introduced in our environment, within the last 20 years.
I would really dispute the conclusiveness that you're claiming regarding cell phones and regarding environmental RF. There isn't that level of conclusiveness, okay? In fact, even the ICRC in their classification, really they put RF in the same classification as chocolate and talcum powder. So it's not a real kind of conclusive science that says that stuff is what you're claiming.
No. There are many scientists
And if I could,
throughout the world.
if I could tell this lady,
Peer-reviewed studies.
the Vermont Health Department did a peer review study last year. I've got a copy I'll give you tonight, or it's on our website or their website. And then that's another study that we'll be commissioning too. But there's a lot of information out there. I think the last time I did a Google search on smart meter health studies, I got 1,050,000 hits. There's a lot of, but there is a Vermont Health Department study. Have you, which I'll give you a copy tonight if you'd like it.
I think the important thing from your perspective is you're absolutely right. It's a personal choice, and you have
Right.
to go with what your
Right.
conscience tells you to do. And you have that option in Vermont, which is a great thing.
In addition to that, I'm getting solar panels put on my house. So is there an impact anywhere? I'm gonna be giving you power.
We have a program to help make that possible.
Jeff, I'd like to talk about this chart you put out. And there's a difference in power between smart meter, roughly 1,000, and, well, I guess it's a 10-to-1 ratio between, or is it a?
It's a 1. So the smart meter is like a 0, and really all that number is it's the number of times more powerful each of those sources is.
And I think it would be more useful if you would put it in context. Let's say somebody used a cell phone for 10 minutes a day, and I think you were talking about the smart meter is on for 10 or 12 minutes.
Seconds.
Seconds. Okay, so you multiply those two out, you get many zeros difference.
Yes.
And does it matter that the frequencies are different? I mean, this is 900 megahertz.
The frequency between cell phones and smart meters is very similar. It's the power that represents the big difference.
All right, so you're tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands different in exposure in a typical day. Does this matter how far away you are from the meter?
Absolutely, the distance is everything with RF exposure.
Where is the meter usually installed?
Outside of the house.
But it depends what's on the other side of the wall. Maybe it could be on your bedroom wall, could be on a living room, or
So Martine
somewhere.
raises a great point. So let me just clarify this. If you are inside of your house, so buildings represent an excellent block for this 900 megahertz RF energy. And if you're on the other side of the wall from the meter, if you're 3 feet away from the back of the meter, in other words, inside, Okay, it's 1.3 million times below the FCC permissible limits for.
But the meter has to
for RF.
communicate with the smart appliances, so therefore it has to make it through the walls.
It does make it through, but it's a very limited amount of energy. And so, and these were measured. These were actually measured recently.
Hi, thank you. I'm Donna Lesko, and I live in South Starksboro on 30 acres on the foothills of Mount Ellen. And I choose to have Ethernet, internet, and no wireless. I choose to have a cell phone in my car that's off for only phone calls. I choose not to have a hand-free phone. I choose not to use a microwave because I have neurological health problems when I do. What bothers me, we can talk till the cows come home here about 100 times more, the FCC allows this. None of us are walking around with chips taking in everything that we're receiving every day, so we don't know, oh, I've had 8 today, I can only have 10, well, I better go home now. Oh, I've had 20 today, oh, I'm 10 over my limit. Got to turn off the cell phone, turn off the TV. We don't, nobody's measuring that stuff. And what really bothers me is that you try, any technology that comes out, we slap it everywhere. We got it on our ear so we can talk in the car. We got it on our hips. We got it next to our brain. We got it in our kids' schools. We got it everywhere. There is not one medical research study that would pass mustard, let alone a long-term study. What's it do to the developing fetus and embryo? What's it do to teenagers developing sexual reproduction? What does it do to people with dementia, Alzheimer, mental health issues, schizophrenia? Does it increase? There is no medical information. So you can all talk here and argue about numbers and power, and we already use cell phones, we already use this, we already use that. It's true, I'm sitting in this room in pain at the moment with my neurological system. And when I walk out of my house and leave my 30 acres, yes. But I don't have Sirius beaming in my car, and I don't want a GPS under my skin and my shoulder, and I don't want a whatever all over me. And yes, when I go into people's homes and neighborhoods, I'm going to be smart metered all over the place. Go for a walk in Burlington, and you can get smart metered all over the place. So what bothers me is that there's no requirement for any solid medical research. That's what bothers me. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great point. This is just an unproven technology, and, you know, it just exposing, people view it as just an experiment of, you know, exposing huge populations to, you know, a whole new source, basically electrosmog, whole new source of RF radiation. And, you know, until, you know, the studies are there already to show that this, you know, damages tissue, damages cells. You know, at very low levels. It doesn't have to be at high levels. Very low level radiation, which is what the problem is with the FCC guidelines, because they're obsolete, because they don't measure the majority of devices that are in use now. So you made a very good point, and yeah, there are a lot of people who are electromagnetically hypersensitive that, you know, and have medical implants and have health problems that this can exacerbate, this type of additional radiation. So it's smarter to err on the side of caution, and we could have used a hardwired meter system, and it certainly would have removed that issue, but it wouldn't have mitigated the privacy angle, which is something that many people find, you know, very disturbing as well. That essentially our Fourth Amendment right is being somewhat trampled on with this information, you know, that utilities will glean, and you know, I've read some of the privacy reports compiled for different utilities, and they are currently, you know, working out what the parameters are, what, you know, what they can access, and you know, if they can get away with selling this data, your information, insurance companies, and you know, law enforcement, and this is true. This is what is currently going on. So. Data miners, marketers, advertisers. So
I'll just correct one thing. I'm not a scientist, but there's a tremendous amount of scientific research on the effect of RF on humans.
Yes.
Tremendous amount. And it's compellingly indicative of safety.
No.
And if I could briefly respond to the privacy issue, you know, if you have a fairly new car, it likely has a black box like airplanes have. you have wireless technology in your cars. Typically when your low tire meters go off, that's wireless. If you have a smartphone, somebody is tracking every single thing you do on here. If you have cable television or direct TV, someone is tracking absolutely everything you watch. Let me repeat again. A, no one has to have a smart meter. B, these utilities are the most highly regulated entities in the state. And
Who is regulating the privacy aspect of it?
well, currently, as you know, we have certain privacy principles pending before the Public Service Board, which we work with the ACLU with, which so far as law enforcement would have the most stringent privacy requirements, I believe, in the country. And I don't think anyone has to worry about the utilities selling your data to third parties, because that is just the kind of thing that regulators love to get a hold of. And
There's no motivation to do it as a utility.
You can make money.
But hackers.
Data is valuable. Exactly,
Be-
hackers
be-
is a very
because
good point.
because we're regulated,
Yes.
our ability to earn revenue is very specifically controlled by the set of rules that exist in the Code of Vermont. And so the only thing that utilities can make money on is a rate of return on capital investment. It's that simple. We don't make money on the power that we sell, okay? It's one for one. It gets passed through to you, okay? So that's it. There's nothing behind the curtain. There's no skeletons in the closet. That's it.
I got a question for you. The question is, and it pertains to the privacy and things. How long have you had your meters? How long have smart meters been in Vermont of those meters? How many times have those utilities been subpoenaed for information from the courts, or they've been tapped into for that? I think that comes back to the privacy issue. And how many times, if you've got an actuary of how much it is, that would be fantastic. I think that'd give us a better handle on as far as privacy goes.
It's a great question, and I wish I had the answer for you. I don't know how many times we've been subpoenaed for information about customer usage. Yes.
You have questions?
Hi, this sort of piggybacks on the last two questions and Martine's comment. Jeff, you said that Green Mountain Power does not share information without customer consent, and I'm just wondering, can you be a little bit more explicit about what Green Mountain Power accepts as customer consent? Is it a little checkbox on the internet? If I think in this day and age, a lot of us have scrolled through something really quickly on Google and accepted their terms and conditions. I just want to make sure that that's not what you're referring to.
Right now, we don't have anything like that. In fact, we don't have a specific tool that allows us to kind of automatically share information yet. So if you wanted to share information, it would very much be an exercise where you would download it and then give it to somebody else, and we wouldn't really play a role in that. And that's what Green Button actually is partly about. Is it puts the ability to share information in your power rather than in the utilities.
And then is consent implied if you access one Green Button agency, let's say, is consent implied for, let's say, 10 agencies? I mean, then is that accepted?
At this point, the Green Button is just a download. So you basically download information about your usage, and then you've got a file and you do what you want with it. So there's no sharing until you actually take that information and send it to somebody.
Except presumably the study going on with UVM and the graduate students, they must be getting customer information in order to do these studies, the behavioral studies.
They don't have any customer information. They may have usage information, which is anonymized, but they don't have customer information.
Okay, well, I
Nothing.
guess that's the important part, whether it's anonymized or not, and who it becomes available to. There's a protection built into it.
Yes.
Mark Bovin. I believe the scientific principle is you can't prove a negative. So that's on this thing on the EMF. But I am so concerned, I'm gonna go build my house, convert my house to a Faraday cage and die eating chocolate. That's the way I wanna go.
Sounds good.
Now, I'm concerned about this EMF. You have Google going around with Google Streets and all that other stuff. You have hackers on the internet. What's to keep somebody from going by and taking the information wirelessly off of customers?
It's been done.
And then the other thing is when I was in the service, I was in the intelligence, which some people say was an oxymoron, I know. I'm not concerned about the government because they can't get their head straight anyways, that's why I left. But I am concerned about these companies because what we used to do was what is now called data mining.
Mhm.
And so there's nothing to keep somebody, unless you have something on that to keep that from somebody going around and collecting it themselves. We're all at risk.
We do. The information that comes off of your meter over the air is encrypted. It uses a very complex encryption algorithm that really makes it not only difficult to get the information and use it, but economically unfeasible to take advantage of it.
And my last point is you talked about the consumer benefit from having that information, and you got a rather sizable grant to do that. I've been looking at getting a data logger for a particular application. So for about $50 or $100, you could make a data logger, put in a current transformer, and the consumer would have the same benefits in his own house for less money than you got the grant to put that in. So where's the benefit to the computer, to the customer, if they could have that in their own house, personally controlled, without having to have this whole thing? Thank you.
Thank you.
So the two-way communication with the utility is a dialogue, okay, that really works together to create the benefits. So the actions of any one individual pale compared to if you can leverage that benefit across the broad group of customers that are electrical users. So I think while you could individually put the CT clamps on and monitor your own electrical usage and all of that stuff, I think that the benefits of having that two-way dialogue with the utility really kind of enhance the benefit and the opportunity for savings for everybody.
I see, just one of the problems with this is that this is the old centralized grid model. This is not going in the direction of sort of distributed energy, that's broken up into smaller sections. The idea is that, an investor-owned utility is the bottom line is always growth and profit, and you have your investors to worry about. So you're actually cultivating more electricity use with electric vehicles and things of that sort. But actually, there was an article, they don't run very well in Vermont in colder temperatures. They're not really, advanced enough to be an efficient alternative here. But I'm not saying maybe in the future they will improve. But the model appears to be to expand people's electricity usage from much of what I've read, not necessarily reduce it.
Not really.
And the meter itself doesn't save any electricity. It's all behavior.
Not really. The idea is to make information available and to help people make better decisions. And when there are tools available to automate that process, the decisions can be made more quickly based on customer preference. As far as centralization versus decentralization, this is just building communications infrastructure on top of the electrical grid so that that dialogue can happen. And this piece is actually necessary in order for the things that you're referring to, microgrids and cogeneration and individual generation, to really be done in a way that's coordinated, that maintains the stability of the whole entire electrical network. This stuff is important.
It is important. But this way you have the final sort of grip, so to speak, on the whole system, as opposed to it being more individual, smaller based, community-based types of projects.
This will support community-based.
I'm not sure I totally agree. I mean, I think to Jeff's point, it's actually democratizing in a sense of better enabling more distributed generation, better enabling more renewables. The old-fashioned grid, I mean, it's technology from the 50s, and its ability to manage lots of different renewable sources is really very limited. The new technology will make it much more able to balance all the different loads that are out there, the different sources that are out there. And I think that's beneficial if more people want to be able to do solar PV, more people want to be able to do wind.
But these
do it in
smart
a way
meters-
that has with a grid that can actually handle that.
But the meters cannot incorporate solar and wind as it stands now, as these meters are currently designed.
Sure they can.
Sure.
I don't understand what you mean incorporate.
Hmm?
What do you mean they
Well, I
can
mean,
incorporate?
if you put a solar, array or whatever on your roof, and you're saying that the meter currently as it exists can incorporate that solar energy and you can sell it back to the grid?
The meter can support net metering, absolutely.
And you can sell any extra energy back to the grid?
Yes.
As it stands now with the smart meter?
Yeah.
Because I've not heard that.
Oh, absolutely.
I got here a little bit late, coming from another meeting, but, and you may have already covered this, but when they converted from analog to digital with the cable systems, they had a converter box for old TVs, and they gave it to your fridge for a certain period of time. And then they charge, I guess, beyond that, and so on. So with that in mind, if you opt out and then you want to come and decide to get a smart meter down the road, is there going to be a charge for that, or would it just be you can join the crowd and?
No charge.
Okay. Figured it
Be
was a quick
happy to
question.
have you opt in.
We've got time for a couple more questions. I'm trying to think of the hands that I've seen up. I did see you. Let's try to keep it brief so that everybody has a chance, so we can get 2-3 more questions in.
My name is Jason Kay, and I'm actually brand new to all the smart meter stuff, so consider me a blank slate. My question is actually more on an operational standpoint, in terms of what has just been brought up with solar PV and net metering. You did just answer this question, but I want to clarify, are the smart meters, can they integrate with net metering? And also, if there are plans to incorporate a time of use rate plan with that net metering. So essentially, if someone has solar PV on their house and they're generating electricity and selling it back to the grid in a high demand time, do they get, say, a premium on that generation?
That's a great question. The answer to the first one is yes, net metering is supported by smart meters. As far as what we're looking at for rates for the sell back, I don't know the answer to that question.
It's no.
I wouldn't go there, but I would say that I don't know the answer to that question.
I've seen this hand for a while. Next to the last question.
My name is Theo Talcott. I came up from Manchester, Vermont tonight on my own time and on my own dime. I've been studying this issue for 2 years. I'm part of Stock Smart Meters. I got interested in the issue because I'm allergic to cell phone radiation, and it makes me nauseous to be near a cell phone. So we feel you that it is a real issue that some of us feel it more than others. So because of that, I've been following the issue about EMFs for a long time, and the amount of stuff you're just kind of poo-pooing the science is just so unfair, just to be like, oh, no, it's perfectly safe, don't worry. It's just like, I bet these same companies would have been saying 30 years ago, it's fine for you to have your house underneath power lines. I'm sure they said that, right?
It's a little like asbestos and
And it is fine.
cigarette smoke.
Great. Okay, so I would like to just say,
It is fine to have your house underneath power lines.
is it?
Most of our houses are under power
You
lines.
would recommend having your house under a power line?
Aesthetic challenges aside, yeah.
Okay, well, there you have it. You're from the horse's mouth. So, let me just dive in on privacy briefly, because no one's really hit it.
Would you please phrase it as a question?
Sure. So,
We'd like to get 2 more.
in terms of data mining, the amount of granular data that comes out of this thing, they know when you're leaving your house, they know if you're Jewish and turn off all your lights on Saturday, so good luck if the fascists find out you're, just like, kind of like wading back into history. But, so, it does create a large data mine. They could sell it for you, like Facebook just sold for $80 billion based on data mining. And you should respond to that, as well as respond to So respond to the fact that even though my friends have opted out in southern Vermont, they're still putting these meters on our houses. The rollout has continued whether or not people opt out.
I'll answer that one. If you can tell me an instance of an address where there's a meter that a utility is installed, give me your address, and if they've opted out, I can assure you the utilities will have it off within a day or two.
We respond very quickly to those.
Okay, okay.
Previous to that, then they put it on the house, I called up and hollered at them, and then they gave me shut it off.
That has been a problem.
There were absolutely, particularly several months ago, some glitches. I think maybe it dealt with some contractors that one of the utilities was using, because we heard those same complaints, but we absolutely, the moment we heard about them, we were all over that. And I do have to say, which I don't always say about the utilities, they were all extremely responsive in getting that rectified. But I should also let you know, if you do hear of those problems, one of the other things we do, we have a consumer affairs department who takes in complaints from any utilities, and I've got some cards I'll leave too. But no, that we hope that situation, we've not heard about that in some time, but if it still is going on, we'd love to know it.
So I just want to toss out, I brought a couple of handouts. They're out on the table. And one of them has a lot of references and, websites and some YouTube videos. And also what I forgot to put on there, there's a great new report. It's called Getting Smarter About the Smart Grid. It came out in early December, recently published by the National Institute for Science, Law, and Public Policy in Washington, D.C., written by smart grid technology expert Timothy, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but it's Schoechle, Schoechle, PhD. So it's getting smarter about the smart grid. And anyway, it really does talk about all the issues we're talking about here, but in much greater depth, I think. And I recommend that as another source.
Could we pass the microphone to the back, please?
And then this gentleman here, and then we'll go into the wrap-up.
I'm Barry Bailey. I've had neurological Lyme disease for 6 years, and I've opted out of having a smart meter. My Lyme specialist says that these radio frequencies, I think you call them, excite certain bacteria, and so for me, when I'm around them, I get a flare-up of symptoms from my Lyme disease. I already have problems if I want to come here and do any research or anything in the library. I have problems when I walk downtown in Middlebury. One of my questions is, if all my neighbors are going to have smart meters nearby, it sounds like I'm going to have some Wi-Fi interference in my brain too. So I want to know about that. You said that there's no rate penalty, but it sounds like I am discriminated against if I can't take part in any of these other things that you're going to roll out that are based on smart meters. So is there a compensation for people who medically can't have smart meters? And the other thing I would just like to say is that I believe during testimony that the head of the health for the state of Vermont thought that we ought to follow the preventative principle and do hardwired. And so I think that that's the safest way to go. But I would like to know about the Wi-Fi from the neighbors, and if there's any compensation if I can't participate in these new ideas for lowering your rates.
Thank you. Well, I could just say that that is the very problem with this system, that's a mesh network, because I have actually two friends that live in a condominium complex. They both happen to have banks of meters on the other side of their wall, and they've opted out. But there are remaining 4 meters, on the wall. And one of them did call Green Mountain Power to ask what they could do about it, and she was told, well, we don't do anything about that. We don't provide any shielding. So it was not a very helpful response. And that is the mesh network. It's just creating a whole environment that is now infused with another layer of a radiation that is already growing and, already increasing, at a level that many experts consider unsafe. Still, I would obviously recommend opting out and talk to your neighbors. If we can't get the meters removed, the only way to really beat this is by opting out en masse. And at this point, I believe we're almost at 5%. 10% would be better yet. That would certainly, slow things up. And And I think that's the only way we can act is to simply say, no, we're not going to participate in this, and we're going to exercise our right to opt out. And thankfully, we are the only state, thanks to Bob Hartwell and Cynthia Browning and other legislators who listened and felt that Vermonters should have a right to not have something that they never wanted to begin with and shouldn't have to pay for something that's harmful, because that's extortion if you have to pay to avoid harm. So I just urge everyone, to do research on your own and find out more and protect your health, protect your privacy. I mean, sometimes, there's a big rush, and the rush is based on all the stimulus money, that's been available. And so the benefits are for the utilities. The benefits are all, and they're trying to sell it, that it's going to be this customer boon. But bottom line is, utilities stand to do very well from this and already have.
The utilities aren't making big bucks out of this, but to your question, having opted out, okay, you've done what you can do as far as, not having a radio transmitter right there. And the distances, this is such an important piece of the exercise here, is that the distance from the radio makes such an enormous difference in the amount of RF that you're actually exposed to, that by opting out, you really have kind of made your home, as long as you don't have a Wi-Fi network or any of these other things in your house, Wi-Fi free. So, I think you've done, if that's your concern, if that's what your doctor told you, then, you've done what you can do and you've done the right thing.
But am I going to get it from my neighbors?
No, because you've got enough distance between you and your neighbor's meter, and you've got a building between you and the meter, so.
It goes through buildings.
But what about the transmission to the telephone poles that are picking up centrally this stuff? Isn't there transmission from my neighbor to that telephone pole that may be crossing me?
The signal travels from meter to meter, but the distances reduce that signal to the point where your exposure is non-existent. And when you're within walls, it's really just not there. The Department of Health did a bunch of measurements. Maybe, Jim, you can.
Yeah, and I would say it's not immeasurable, because we've just spent a good bit of money having it measured. but it requires the dissipation rate, particularly from the emissions of the smart meters, are exponential. It'll be publicly available in a report. And then the other issue, when you talk about your neighbors, do they have cell phones? Do they have microphones? Do they have cordless phones? Do they have Wi-Fi? Do they have And so when you're talking about what is really one of the less significant emitters, but you'll find another measurement report, because he does. There are a lot of graphs about the dissipation of the emissions.
Quick little question. I'd like to know why Green Mountain Power didn't understand or didn't know that the Zigbee protocol component in the Elster meter was turned on. Can you explain why you apparently bought these meters with the understanding that that was off and could be turned on if someone wished to engage in that whole?
I'll answer that. Yeah, when we bought the meters, we were focused on the 900 megahertz spectrum. We asked the vendor about the Zigbee chip. They said that it doesn't transmit unless it's turned on. We learned afterwards, and they actually learned afterwards, that in fact it does send out an occasional
It's turned on.
Are
and
you
it's
out there signal.
The
So
2.4 gigahertz, like
Yep.
trying to connect with smart appliances.
It's
So
looking-
it's constantly
It's looking for smart
searching
appliances,
to
yeah.
connect with them.
So
So
it
it's
ta-
another transmitter, it's another layer of
So it talks a few
RF.
times a minute. And the
So there are
ultimate
two.
the ultimate answer to this is, if you're not comfortable with the meter, if you're not comfortable with the RF, you should opt out. But you should also recognize that the entire package, that entire meter with the Zigbee chip and the 900 megahertz radio, talk for 10 seconds a day, and you've got devices that talk virtually constantly all around.
I don't know, I've heard more like 2 minutes, which also may seem like a very brief time, but they are constant pulses. mean, 8,000 on average.
They're not
I can
constant.
also tell you, all of the Zigbee emissions have been measured too by the study we did, and I would also follow up that with the Elster Zigbee transmissions, I believe there's a software upgrade coming where that will be shut off, similar to the other meters.
That is absolutely the case. We've worked with Elster, and they're gonna
There's a way
issue
to
a modification that's actually going to turn off the Zigbee chip like we had originally
So
thought
you
it
need
would
to,
be.
to go back into every meter to
Nope.
turn off the
Nope. We can
chip?
do it over the air.
It's a couple of minutes before 9, and we really want to wrap up at 9. I was,
Question will stay.
well, I think it'd be fair to our panelists to, that if they wanted to continue answering questions for you, maybe after we finish, is there,
A burning desire?
let's ask the panelists. You mean quick?
Yeah, Leah.
Okay.
You said it's not UL listed.
Yes.
Is it UL listed? You can't put something on my house electrically that has been known to cause fires all across this country if it's not UL listed. Yes or no?
UL doesn't apply to meters.
Okay.
UL applies to appliances. United Labs applies to appliances, not to meters. So it's a
Okay.
completely different standard, and it does have certifications and complies with standards.
Okay.
And they're tested to the nines.
Okay.
But
One
Jim
last
Porter-
comment is, if anyone's allergic to 2.4 gigahertz, it's all over your head right here. So,
I just want to say,
we're in
Jim
trouble.
Porter, in a Rutland Herald article recently, did say, you said, I believe these are UL listed.
That is correct, and I have now had a lengthy conversation with UL. And in point of fact, they are working for listings as far as the electrical piece goes, not the RF emissions. So when I said, I was glad I said believe, because I was incorrect about that, although they are going to be listed for that function of it that UL does.
I'd like to give the panelists a couple of minutes each, just to, a minute to 2 minutes each, to just sum up what you feel are the most important parts that people should take away from this meeting. Well, we started with, why don't we do the inverse order that we started in the opening presentation?
So
And
start
that would
with
be Jim first.
Okay. I would just, thank you all for coming tonight. It's always interesting to come out and hear various opinions from people working at the department. We enjoy hearing everyone's perspective on things. We do have information on our website, and we'll have more coming up. And I will leave some cards, and we always like hearing from you, and appreciate your coming tonight.
Yeah, again, also thanks for coming out. It was a really interesting conversation. I kind of felt like I was sort of stuck between two sides. But I think that there's a lot still to learn. I think about both cost, about benefits, and some of the issues we talked about tonight. And I think that there's a fair amount of focus on some of the potential negatives tonight. But I think that, especially as we learn more about how people can interact with this technology and use information, there's going to be a lot more to learn about, just as there was in the early days of the internet, what these benefits are, how people can use them, how you can take advantage of this, so that, as with other RF emitting devices, that this will be a technology that people will actually want to take advantage of, because they will see that there are benefits that outweigh what some of the potential concerns might be. Thank you.
Okay, well, this has been great coming tonight and hearing questions and just, helping people understand that the picture painted by utilities is really not the full picture. There are health effects from this radiation, and there are privacy issues. They're very real. I think this goes to kind of the heart of what the problems are, because I think within our own home, we should be protected from additional sources of, a long-term exposure that can be harmful. And yes, we can opt out, but because of the mesh network system, it will impact you, when you're surrounded by neighbors that have these meters, because that's what RF does. It travels through everything. It travels through walls. Mountains and things, that's another problem. So I think the way, using RF, my understanding is they have to have additional repeater meters and more collector meters to actually move the signal, because of all the natural interference. So it's a lot of additional radiation added to the environment that I really feel we don't need. And thankfully, we as a state in Vermont do have the no-fee opt-out. So I urge everyone to opt out and protect your health and protect your privacy. Thank you.
So I'll turn the focus back to benefits and say that what we're doing is we're creating a layer on top of the existing electrical network that allows us to communicate in two ways. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow those 3 buckets of benefits to be realized. We're going to have individual choice much more enhanced in the way you use electricity based on information you have. There will be the ability to apply automation to that. That will be totally in your control. You'll have the ability to attach generation and have that net metering and all of these additional features. Okay, so you've got individual benefits. Then there are operational benefits. We'll be able to get the lights back on sooner because we'll know when they're out sooner, and we'll know where they're out, and you won't have to call. We'll be able to know when the lights have come back on so that we won't have to call you at 2 in the morning to say, hey, are the lights back on? That's another huge set of benefits. And then finally, there's the societal benefits where we're reducing the amount of transmission that we're going to need to purchase, which is an enormously the societal benefits where we're reducing the amount of transmission that we're going to need to purchase, which is an enormously expensive resource. It costs trillions of dollars to buy transmission capacity in the United States. We're going to reduce our requirements for additional generation capacity, and we'll be reducing the amount of energy that Vermonters use in general compared to what they would otherwise be using. And all of that is good for Vermonters and good for Vermont. And so thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. You guys have asked some fantastic questions, and I've enjoyed this thoroughly.
I'd like to thank our panelists. You've done a really great job, and I think that there's still a lot of unanswered questions, but we've got materials that the panelists have left up here. Hopefully this will encourage you to go and research this further on your own. You've been a great audience. I can see that a lot of you would still like to keep going for a while, but unfortunately the room turns into a pumpkin at 9. So thank you very much.